Hi there, welcome inside the Mountain West Network studio as we get set to go inside Mountain West men's basketball with National College basketball writer Andy Glockner. But before we get his insight, let's take a look at the updated standings in Mountain West men's basketball. Got a little bit of a change at the top. New Mexico has pulled even with San Diego State in a race for a Mountain West title, fresh off the win over the Aztecs. They both sit at 12-2. Then you got three teams sitting in a tie for third place: Boise State, UNLV, and Wyoming, all sitting at 8-6. Nevada at 8-7. Fresno State at 7-8, Colorado State 6-9. Then you got Utah State, Air Force, and San Jose State rounding out the Mountain West men's basketball standings. San Jose State, of course, picking up their first Mountain West win over the last week. Let's start with talking about the New Mexico's fresh off that win over the Aztecs, pull into number 25 in the latest AP rankings. Cam Bairstow, a game-high 26 points, dominant against the Aztecs. The Lobos held San Diego State to 44 points. They've now held teams, 9 straight teams, to under their scoring average. What did the Lobos tell you in that win over the Aztecs?
They've told us over the last couple of weeks that they are getting better. Craig Neal has insisted they're not as bad defensively as we have been talking about this season, and they're showing signs of that. That said, I'm a little wait and see. This was impressive. You go to UNLV and win, you come home and you hammer San Diego State. The final margin not really descriptive of how dominant the performance was from New Mexico and how difficult a time San Diego State had. That said, these are two teams. UNLV playing with two bigs, Kem Birch and Roscoe Smith. They lack consistent perimeter shooting. They lack at times consistent point guard play to hurt you. They did the first time they played New Mexico. They did not at all this time. Improvement or inconsistency, I don't know. San Diego State, with Xavier Thames in a 3 to 4 game slump now, doesn't have a secondary offensive option that can carry you. You said one double-digit scorer. Winston Shepard, for all the good things he does, is not going to pour in 25 points to beat a New Mexico on the road. I would like to see New Mexico carry this forward now against teams with personnel that are going to challenge their setup a little bit more. Bairstow and Kirk, we could call him Burke if you want, the Burke pairing. Very comfortable against a UNLV, very comfortable against a San Diego State, not as comfortable against Boise State that's playing with 4 guards, or Nevada with their perimeter attack, or a Fresno State team we'll talk about that's surging and can hurt you in a number of ways from the perimeter. I want to see how this defensive improvement translates now against matchups that are less comfortable for them. That said, very, very impressive week, and once again, New Mexico, like we say every season in the Mountain West, in position to win the regular season championship.
San Diego State, fresh off that loss, falls to number 13 in the latest AP. They are 23-3 overall. The 44 points against New Mexico, certainly low. One player scores in double figures, Winston Shepard. Xavier Thames struggles, goes 3 for 15 from the field. We've established over the last few weeks, and you've called it, they need to get better at scoring. They need to up the points per game. How do they do it?
I think Craig Neal voiced that in the interview on the broadcast the other night. He said we wanted to keep them out of transition. And we talk about ways teams go about scoring. We talk about this a lot with Wyoming, pre-Larry Nance, and we'll talk about them in a few minutes. But San Diego State has a very defined way that they look to score, too. They are a poor, by any measure, a poor shooting team this season, one of the worst shooting teams in Division I from a percentage basis. They have one guy, Xavier Thames, who can shoot from 3. Everybody else is mediocre or worse, honestly. They have one guy, Skylar Spencer, who's above 47% from 2-point range, and he's not a main offensive cog. Everybody else, low efficiency. They only have one guy who's a good free throw shooter, Xavier Thames. Everybody else, 68, 66, 64%. The way they've been piecing this together is hit the offensive glass, don't turn the ball over, get to the free throw line. And the volume sort of makes up for their lack of efficiency. When Xavier Thames, your only good perimeter scorer, is not playing well or is being shut down, and like Saturday night, they didn't get to the free throw line at all against New Mexico, this is where it runs dry. And then you look at another game where I think it was 59 or 60 possessions, which has been the trend for San Diego State over the last 4 or 5 games. It's too slow, it's not varied enough, and when your best player is not shooting well, they don't have anywhere to turn offensively. Defensively, they were fine. They held a good New Mexico team under 1 point per possession at the pit. That's hard to do, but it wasn't close.
Boise State, a team that got a thrilling victory over UNLV. Derek Marks scores 13 points alone in overtime. If this is a guy that gets hot, could he carry them in the Mountain West tournament to 3 straight wins or 4 straight wins if that's the case? Could he be the guy that, get on my back, fellas, going to will you to a Mountain West tournament championship?
I would say no. And that's not a shot at Derek Marks. I think Derek Marks can do what you saw him do Now, we didn't talk about the first 40 minutes when he was 2 for 8 and had 4 points. So Derek Marks can do down the stretch. We saw it earlier in a game where he was unsuccessful holding the ball a lot of possessions down the stretch of a game, did not convert. I think one thing that was actually notable, which I said on Twitter when it happened, was the first possession in the last possession in overtime when they were down 1 and had a chance to win. Marks gave the ball up to Anthony Drimmick. Drimmick drove and got his shot blocked. They reset off the baseline. Then Marks got the ball back and said, "I'll take this one," and got a great shot in the lane and hit it. And they escaped on the review after the shot from DeVille Smith. I don't think Derek Marks is a 120 minutes of that type player, but I don't think he has to be. You have Drimmick. You have Jeff Aloriaga back now to hit a spot 3. You've got guys like Mikey Thompson pitching in. You've got the rebounding and scoring around the basket for Ryan Watkins. They are a dangerous team that was a wounded animal with all of these close losses, 1 possession, 2 possession losses, games they didn't close out. I would not want to be, and we'll talk about the tournament bracket as it's starting to shape up. That's a team now. We talked about them last week. Did you think you could creep into the top 3, top 4, get a bye? Now, if you're one of the top 2 teams, you're looking at Boise State and or UNLV potentially in a semifinal. Pick your poison. Like, which way do you want to go with it?
I think one of those teams last week would have been Wyoming, that dangerous team that nobody wanted. Not that the Cowboys are soft now, but they certainly took a big blow with Larry Nance Jr., their leading scorer, their leading rebounder, leading blocker, leading stealer. He goes down with a season-ending ACL injury. Obviously, this is going to hurt this team going forward. How much does it hurt him, and who's got to step up around him to make sure that maybe they can go a little bit further without Larry Nance Jr. in the lineup because he was their most important player?
This is going to be a very high technical basketball term. This is a bummer.
Well said.
There's no other way to put it. Larry Nance was Wyoming basketball this year, and that's not with any disrespect to his teammates. They run a very organized system. Larry Scheid has found a way to shape a team around, or did find a way to shape a team around Larry Nance's varied skills. Yeah. Scoring, rebounding, block shots, steals, defending in the post, whatever. Get out and run. Dunks, energy. You yank that out of the middle of this, and frankly, they just have a team of guys right now. Now, that doesn't mean they can't compete. Sure. I thought they went down to Colorado State this week. They shot 50% from the field, which they tend to do on a low number of field goal attempts, which is their MO. They shot 10 of 17 from 3. They got to the free throw line more than Colorado State, which in Fort Collins is hard to do, yeah. And they lost by 15.
Right.
They got crushed on the glass. They couldn't force turnovers, and they couldn't stop Colorado State, which in itself is honestly not a great or highly efficient offensive team. Daniel Bejarano almost a triple-double. This is going to be hard for Wyoming, and it's a bummer. It's a bummer across the league. You know, if you looked at the Twitter response after the injury Wednesday night when it happened, fans from every team were talking about Larry Nance and how upset they were about this. That's a tribute to him. It's a tribute to the type of basketball that he and Wyoming were playing this year. I think people understood what they were watching, that it didn't have to be glorious to be good. And unfortunately right now, yeah, Wyoming is the wild card, because if you're one of those top 3 or 4 teams in the league, and you get them in a quarterfinal, I think that's an easier game now. Not necessarily a comfortable game, yeah, but an easier game than potentially a surging Fresno State or a Nevada team with guys who can go off in a one-game scenario, knock you out. Wyoming just right now does not look like it has that capacity anymore.
Certainly wish Larry Nance Jr. a speedy recovery and hope he and the Wyoming basketball team do well going forward without him. Moving on to Fresno State, Paul Watson and Marvell Harris combined for 35 points in a win on the road at Utah State. This is the type of complementary play that I think that guys like Johnson and Guerrero need for them to be a dominant force come tournament time, because they've been the do-it-all, Johnson and Guerrero. They get the chip-ins from Harris and Watson. That's a team that certainly could do some damage as well.
We've talked about Fresno State and Rodney Terry. Last year, very, very defensive team, couldn't score. Now, as a youngish coach, flips the script and is embracing a team that has to outscore you. They can't stop anybody. I mean, let's be honest. They just do not have the personnel. They don't have the front court size. This is who they are this year. But when you're talking about adding legitimate secondary scorers now to Cesar Guerrero and to Tyler Johnson, and let's not ignore Alan Huddleston. He has capability, even if he's not necessarily a high-efficiency guy. And now you're talking about these guys starting to pour in points. It's not just a two-man show now. If they get 3 guys going, if they get 4 guys going, you're going to end up in an uncomfortable game. You talk about the way Wyoming throttles things down. We talked about San Diego State getting sucked down in tempo. Well, when you play Fresno State, it's going to start to go the other way. They want to run. They want the game to be ragged and sloppy and open, and they want to score. They want transition buckets. It's a good watch. Rodney Terry's doing a good job there. Can they win 3 games in Vegas? I don't know. Can they knock somebody off in the quarterfinals? Yeah, the way they're playing, they can, especially if they're getting varied offense from more than 2 sources.
To your credit, back in October, this was the team that you picked as the team that could emerge from the shadows, Fresno State, and all of a sudden they're one of the hottest teams entering March. So good call on that. Props where props are due. Moving on to seeding. How much did the loss from San Diego State, how much did that bump them down, national tournament seeding, and how much did New Mexico increase their tournament seeding with the win over the Aztecs?
It's going to be interesting to see how, in 3 weeks, this pans out, whether San Diego State's resume is going to stand out or whether their perceived quality is going to stand out, especially if they don't now bump it back up and start winning some games and looking impressive again. New Mexico, on the other side, their resume is less than what I think they're playing at right now. So where are you going to see this sift out? If they're end up tied for the league championship, regular season, very possible. San Diego State does get New Mexico at home, so even if they're a game back because of the schedule, they drop one of the 2 road games they have before that, they can still beat the Lobos and potentially be the 1 seed in the conference tournament. New Mexico, I think, is still going to be behind them because of overall resume quality, but it's going to be interesting to see, does New Mexico get a bump because of their surge, or does San Diego State then get downgraded because people are starting to see the reality and maybe the ceiling of that team? And they're not supposed to consider last season, but there are still 8 of the same 10 people on the selection committee that saw what happened in the Mountain West last year. It's only human nature. You're not technically supposed to consider it, but when you're breaking a tie and you say, well, should we make San Diego State a 3 seed or should we make some other team a 3 seed? Well, I don't really like what I'm seeing right now, and they look limited, and the whole league bombed out last year. That's human nature in the discussion of 10 people on the selection committee. So I'm intrigued to see how that's going to go, and as we discussed a little bit, I'm intrigued to see how the seeding is going to work out, because I think beyond being I don't know that it's going to make a huge difference 1 versus 2 seed. What is going to make a huge difference in a league where 3 through 8 or 3 through 9 are so balanced is how those teams match up against each other in quarterfinals and semifinals. So I'm going to be anxious to see how the bracket comes out, and then we can really dig into that once we know.
Be a very telling stretch run in the Mountain West. Yep. 2 weeks to the Mountain West tournament in Las Vegas at the Thomas & Mack Center. For Andy Glockner, I'm Jesse Kurtz. Thanks for logging on to the Mountain West Network.